What up, motherfuckers? I started making this video a few days ago and then some shit just happened and came up and I forgot to finish it up in this motherfucker, so I'm going to start doing it from scratch. You know what I'm saying? This is going to be the Survivor Series review. Thanks to everyone who congratulated me on my 800th subscriber. Shout out to you, number 800, 801, and 102. Yeah, I don't know. I've been like really shitty about giving subscriber shout outs, but we're going to bring that back, I promise, you know? Just a matter of like me getting the notifications, you know what I mean? It is what it is. But anyways, let's talk about Survivor Series, right? Obviously, the most important thing that happened on the show was the Undertaker's retirement. Everything else is somewhat forgettable, let's be honest. But without further ado, let's get to it. All right, first of all, we had the pre-show up in this motherfucker, right? We had The Miz winning the Battle Royal. Now, this would be something that mattered if the Survivor Series competitive element mattered this year, but it didn't seem to matter at all, you know? Like last year, I remember that after every match, the announcers would talk about the tally, right? The scorecard. It'd be like NXT has won 2, SmackDown has won 1, and Raw has won 1 or something, right? To kind of remind you like where things stand. This didn't happen right now, and I understand it's easier to keep track in your head if it's just 2 people competing, 2 groups competing, but nonetheless, it just didn't feel like it was a big deal. Like, it didn't really matter to me if Raw or SmackDown won, you know? Usually I'm a SmackDown guy, but it didn't really matter to me, you know what I mean? Like, the only thing that mattered was Undertaker's retirement, and everything else just kind of felt like Monday Night Raw level stuff, you know? So, The Miz won. I guess that means Raw has 1 point, but who gives a rat's ass? You know what I'm saying? It was on the pre-show. No one gives a fuck. I like The Miz. I hope he does good, but this didn't matter, you know what I mean? I didn't even watch it, if I'm being honest with you motherfuckers. Next up, we had Team Raw versus Team SmackDown. The only match in this card that I actually was looking forward to because I love elimination matches, and I didn't expect anything from the women's match. This match was horseshit. This was one of the worst Survivor Series matches I've ever seen in my life. First of all, like, when you see people coming out to the ring, you realize how many jobbers there are, right? Like Corey Graves or whoever the fuck it was, someone was putting over Braun Strowman as being one of the best Survivor Series like competitors of all time, you know what I mean? And I'm just like, yeah, it doesn't feel that way, you know? He just feels like a jobber now, you know? Like, he's had like, I know he was champion this year, but he didn't feel like a champion. You know, he feels like a mid-carder again. You know, people are saying he might go to Retribution now, you know, which is like, honestly, if that happens, I mean, like, I think it's just a negative for everyone involved, including Retribution and including Braun Strowman. Nonetheless, the people felt like jobbers, especially Team SmackDown. Team SmackDown was Jay Uso, he's the captain somehow, Kevin Owens, Corbin, Rollins, and Otis. Out of all those people, the only one that's actually worth watching is Seth Rollins, and we'll get to that in a minute, right? Versus Team Raw, which was AJ Styles, Keith Lee, Strowman, Sheamus, and Riddle. Not even Matt Riddle, he's just Riddle now, you know what I'm saying? Now, I understand that they just use the last names of people, they just like forget the first name sometimes, but if your last name leaves you with the name Riddle, that's just stupid, you know what I mean? Like, that's just dumb. Like, Riddle's not even like a common last name, you know? It is what it is, whatever, right? The match started, no one gave a rat's ass, you know? You're thinking it's gonna be some sort of competitive match, but in fact what happened was this. After the match gets going, Seth Rollins tags in, so you're thinking to yourself, oh shit, Seth Rollins time motherfucks, you know what I mean? Like, you're finally gonna get to see some Seth Rollins action, and you know, he might go against AJ Styles, right? One of the things that hasn't really happened, like, I feel like they've always been on different shows. You know, either AJ was on SmackDown and Rollins was on Raw, or vice versa, you know? So I'm like, all right, let's see what happens, you know? Maybe they'll do some moves against each other. No, what happens is Seth Rollins, like, his character is just all over the place, you know? His character makes no sense. But basically, like, he comes out and he drops to his knees and he says to Sheamus, do your part. So Sheamus kicks him in the face, and that's it, right? Since WrestleMania, Seth Rollins has pretty much been feuding exclusively with Rey Mysterio. So, I mean, I could say this was a shit year for him too. But he gets eliminated in the most ridiculous of fashions, right? It's like, dude, why are you even in this match if you're not going to take it that seriously, you know? It is what it is. He gets eliminated. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, now some shit's going to go down, right? Team SmackDown leaves the ring, and they start regrouping, you know? They start talking strategy, right? But then you realize, you're like, holy shit, like, Otis is in this team, you know what I mean? Like Jay Uso is on this team. Like, this is a team of losers. This is a team of people that have, like, won, like, 3 singles matches in their combined careers, you know? Baron Corbin, I mean, this guy was supposed to be a huge deal. He's failed completely. You know, Kevin Owens, I mean, like, I think Kevin Owens might be the most overrated wrestler in the history of the world, but that's not even here or there, motherfuckers. That's a different point altogether, right? So you're thinking they might pick up a win or two, right? Next up, Owens comes in. Long story short, he gets a phenomenal forearm by AJ Styles and gets pinned. I believe that's what happened, right? Then King Corbin comes in, and at this point, you know what's going to happen. They got rid of Rollins and Owens. So unless they're going to book it so Jey Uso beats everyone, you know, it's the writing's on the wall, right? King Corbin comes in, does his moves. You're thinking he might pin someone. No, he doesn't even pin one person, right? AJ Styles, I think, hits a Pele kick, tags in Riddle. Riddle hits the floating bro, and that's it for Corbin, right? So we have Otis and Jey Uso. Otis has a nice little showing afterwards. You're thinking to yourself, all right, he might pick up an elimination or two, you know what I mean? And they might make it like 2-on-2. And then in the end, it's like Jey Uso against against two guys. Jey Uso pins one guy, and then the other guy just kind of cheats and pins Jey Uso. Is the best case scenario we can have for Team SmackDown. Of course, that's not what happens. Otis is completely manhandled eventually, gets power slammed by Braun Strowman, and that's it for Otis. Now it's Uso against 5. This has never been done. No one's ever come back from a 1-5 deficit. So at this point, it didn't even matter what was going to happen, right? It didn't even matter if Jey Uso were to eliminate 4 people in a row. None of this shit matters, right? Like, if they were trying to go for like a Shawn Michaels Survivor Series moment where it's just him against like 3 or 4 people from SmackDown and he's like surviving somehow, you know? They failed, obviously, because they didn't even go for that. But if they're going to do that, you need a Shawn Michaels for that, right? You need someone that like can conceivably, you know, just on their greatness alone, achieve these odds, right? So that's not what happened. Jey Uso came in, did a bunch of super kicks. He has 2 moves. He has a super kick and the splash. So he did one of his 2 moves, went for the second move, got caught by Keith Lee, who hit the Spirit Bomb and pinned him. It was embarrassing. Team SmackDown got completely cucked, as was kind of the theme, you know, of this pay-per-view. I feel like it typically is these last few years, but it was what it was, right? Next up, we had Street Profits versus New Day. Now, this match actually was better than I thought it would be. You know, I cannot deny the fact that Street Profits are actually pretty decent in the ring, right? Like, they're a pretty decent tag team. You know, the match was full of, like, horseshit, like Kofi Kingston kicking out of, like, their tag team finisher, right? Where, you know, the anointment by Dawkins, and then the From the Heavens from Montez Ford, and he kicks out of that. And you'd think like, that they're wrestling like Hulk Hogan or something. It's fucking Kofi Kingston, you know? But whatever. It is what it is, as we always say around this motherfucker, you know? So basically, after that, the match goes on for a little longer. Montez Ford does Trouble in Paradise. It looked kind of shitty, but not any shittier than when Kofi Kingston does it. So it is what it is, you know what I mean? I feel like you just kind of buried Kofi Kingston and his move by doing that, because it's like supposed to be this move that's like hard to do, you know? Otherwise, why the hell would Kofi Kingston botch it every other time, or probably every time? But he did it. Eventually, Dawkins does like a blind tag, gets Xavier on the electric chair, which allows Montez Ford to get up and hit a blockbuster. This was pretty cool. It was a pretty cool finish, and here's why. Montez Ford is probably one of the only people that can do his part of this finishing move, because Dawkins, even though he's goofy and like kind of box-shaped, you know, he's a tall guy, right? He's like a tall dude. He's like 6'3", 6'5", somewhere in that range, I would say. Maybe even taller, you know what I'm saying? So, like, him plus Xavier on his shoulders is a good 10 feet, right? And, you know, you could really do that move and fuck it up, but Montez Ford did it. He didn't do it perfectly, but he did it well enough, right? And because of the height of Dawkins, it looked like a finisher, you know? So it would have been weird if somehow, you know, Xavier Woods kicked out. You know, the match was over basically already, like in terms of time, and that happened, right? So good. SmackDown gets one. Their tag team champions are better than Raw's tag team champions. Also of note is how, like, a lot of these people that were in this pay-per-view, like, a lot of them had just recently switched shows. You know what I mean? Like everyone on Team Raw was like on SmackDown basically like a few weeks ago, you know, before the draft, and vice versa, you know. There's a few of them, you know, there's a few motherfucks like Corbin, who's been on SmackDown for like an eternity, but the majority of them had just recently switched. So that just kind of like really ruins the whole, you know, like element of Survivor Series, the whole idea of like brand loyalty. It's like, why the fuck would Keith Lee give a shit about, you know, like Team Raw? Like, he was on NXT like a few weeks ago. Why the hell would Riddle care about Team SmackDown? Or Team Raw, I should say. He was on SmackDown like 2 weeks ago. You know, it doesn't matter. Like, there's nothing, like, who cares, you know? So, and same thing with these two tag teams who just basically traded shows and traded tag teams, tag team titles. It was just really stupid. But The match was all right, I guess. Then we had Lashley versus Sami Zayn. Somehow, maybe it's because of my undying loyalties to SmackDown, but I found myself cheering for Sami Zayn here. I don't know why. Like, I hate Sami Zayn. Like, he's right there with Kevin Owens as one of the most overrated wrestlers of all time. The only reason he's not, like, more overrated than Owens is because he's never won anything except for this Intercontinental title. So, but I'm enjoying this Sami Zayn, like, his appearance. He has this, like, Fidel Castro look kind of, going on, right? And, he wrestles like a complete coward, like a complete heel. Like, it's so over the top that it's funny. It's gotten to the point where it's kind of funny. And, like, I personally, when I watch him wrestle, I want to see him find a way to, like, get the victory or something, right? Typically, it would be find a way to keep the title. But in this case, it has to be find a way to get the victory. Now, if you consider the fact that Sami Zayn is supposed to be this cowardly heel, the question then becomes, why doesn't he just go and just kick Bobby Lashley in the balls and lose the match, right? The title's not on the line anyways, so like he's never going to have to wrestle Bobby Lashley again. They're on different shows, so there's that. And then you also have, like, the fact that Sami Zayn isn't supposed to care about things like SmackDown beating Raw. Like, he doesn't give a shit, So, but Bobby Lashley wins at, like, basically a comedy match after he puts on the full Lashley, the Hurt Lock on Sami Zayn's bitch ass, causing Sami Zayn to tap out. All of a sudden, the announcers were treating the Hurt Business like faces. They're like, oh, Hurt Business hasn't done anything to Sami. What do you mean? Have you ever watched the Hurt Business wrestle? Like, they're always doing, like, nefarious shit, But now it's like, they didn't do it yet. They didn't do it yet. They're faces. Like, Sami Zayn's the bad guy here, It was really weird. It just showed, this week-to-week booking that, WWE is becoming famous for, where nothing's actually happening. It's just, like, basically like, oh, what's going to happen this week? What's going to happen next week, So, yeah, the match wasn't great or anything like that. It was enjoyable in its own way, I suppose, but nothing great. It was certainly better than the next match on the card, which was Sasha Banks versus Asuka. Once again, the point that I made for the Survivor Series match, as well as the tag team match, stands here as well, right? Sasha Banks versus Asuka is not the special attraction type of scenario, right? It's not like, oh, the best person on SmackDown versus the best person on Raw. It's the people that, like, feuded. Like, I'm pretty sure Sasha Banks is the last feud that Asuka had. You know what I mean? It was like her and Bayley, and Sasha Banks was the last person to beat Asuka for the Raw title. You know what I mean? And then, like, she got jobbed out the next week, like, as if nothing happened. Like, Asuka just took care of her like a jobber, So, like, nothing really, like, exciting was happening here. It was just a rematch of a match they had a few pay-per-views ago, So nobody cared. Sasha Banks won. It really didn't mean anything. It didn't matter at all. And this is the kind of booking problems that I'm talking about, right? It's like they don't think ahead with all this shit, right? They don't think ahead at all. All they do is, like, they'll just kind of, like, use their ace in the deck as soon as they can. Like, I thought the feud between Bayley, Sasha, and Asuka was pretty great, considering what it was, right? They used that ace in the hole, and now it's like, oh shit, now we gotta do a champion versus champion match. What are we gonna do? You know what I mean? They can't really give the title to a jobber and have an even more meaningless match, so they went with this, It failed completely. Then, I'm thinking to myself, next up we have the Women's Survivor Series match, so I'm hoping that this kind of compensates for that horseshit match that we saw earlier. I'm thinking to myself, all right, this could be good, if everyone does their jobs, right? So my theory that Lana was going to be the sole survivor came true. However, instead of doing it my way, which I think was substantially better, they did it their way, which was complete shit, right? So the match starts really quickly into the match. Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax tell Lana to just stay on the steps, right? Stand on the steps, kid. You're not good enough to even be, like, on the apron, So Lana's there, like, crying and all upset and shit, you know what I'm saying? And then the same thing happens as if it was the men's match, right? Team SmackDown just gets completely cucked. They get completely humiliated by Team Raw. First of all, Bayley, the longest reigning SmackDown Women's Champion. Like, I think her last reign is, like, one of the longest reigns, or, like, definitely she was booked as a big deal, She loses. She gets eliminated first by Peyton Royce. Peyton Royce hits the Deja Vu, which is Goldust's finishing move. She hits that horse shit and wins. So I'm thinking to myself, all right, this is kind of good for Peyton. It gives her a little bit of, like, clout. But the problem is this: nobody gives a shit about Peyton Royce. Like, this has been a failed experiment. Her and Billie Kay splitting up has been a failed experiment. They need to, like, really go back, kind of like how they did with Riot Squad. except for the fact that Riot Squad, like, nobody wants to see them back. Nobody wants to see them at all, you know? Then Peyton Royce gets eliminated by Natalya. Natalya goes for the pin-up strong. Remember the pin-up strong, which is her weird submission move, right? She fails completely, and then she's forced to do the sharpshooter, right? Let's get it straight, Natalya. Just do your one move. Stick to your horse shit. You know what I mean? You're not good enough to do these moves that you haven't done in years. Nobody gives a fuck. Nobody wants to see the pin-up strong. I'm probably the only person who saw this and thought, she's going for pin-up strong. You know what I mean? Everyone else was like, what the fuck is she doing? This looks retarded. What is this, like a retarded version of the sharpshooter? Anyways, then Natalya gets pinned by Lacey Evans after the woman's right. Now you know shit has hit the fan. Now you know shit is going downhill. Because some of the only people that we have left are the Riot Squad and Bianca Belair. Now again, Bianca Belair is like the Jay Uso of this match, right? You can put your hopes on Bianca Belair. But let's be real, Bianca Belair, even though I think she's probably the best wrestler in this match, you know, maybe like only comparable to like Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax, who are pretty decent, right? But she's not fucking Shawn Michaels. She's Bianca Belair nonetheless, you know? So, yeah, then Ruby Riott gets eliminated by Shayna Baszler. She gets eliminated, but with a Kirifuda clutch, which is just another weird name for the sleeper hold. Enough of this horseshit. Oh, Kakina clutch, Kirifuda clutch. Just fucking call it what it is. It's a sleeper hold, rear naked choke. None of them do it any differently. None of them do it exceptionally well. So just fucking call it what it is. The sleeper hold, right? So she puts a sleeper hold on her. Ruby Riott, I think, gets her hand on the rope, but someone moves it or some shit, right? And Ruby Riott passes out, and she just gets pinned, you know? Which is like the ultimate disgrace. Then Lacey Evans gets eliminated by Liv Morgan in another meaningless elimination that will lead to nothing, right? Liv Morgan gets almost immediately eliminated by Nia Jax after she eliminates Lacey Evans. And now we have a situation where we have Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler versus Bianca Belair with Lana hanging out on the outside, right? What happens? Yeah, Shayna Baszler comes and gets the Kirifuda clutch once again on Bianca Belair, who makes it to the ropes, right? Shayna Baszler doesn't let go and gets disqualified. So that's one horseshit elimination. Then, Nia Jax and Bianca Belair, now you're thinking to yourself, all right, there's a possibility here, kayfabe-wise, that two things could happen. Bianca Belair could beat Nia Jax, and then it's her against Lana, and then she will be the favorite. Or, she beats Nia Jax, and it's her against Lana, and Lana pulls off an incredible upset, setting her up for a face turn, right? Neither of those two things happened. What happened was they started wrestling outside, and they both got counted out. And by default, Lana is the sole survivor. Lana gets in the ring and celebrates as if she just won the main event of WrestleMania. You know, you didn't do anything. You know, she's like, I did it. I'm the sole survivor. You didn't do anything. Like, I could have been the sole survivor if I was in that match. She didn't do anything. You know what I mean? Every one of you could have been the sole survivor if you were in that match, right? So this was really, really bad, right? It robbed Lana of the moment that they were trying to give her. So, which begs the question of why are we even doing this? You know, why are you even doing this horse shit? Like, you're not giving Lana a moment here. This is not a moment that's going to go down her career as like an achievement, right? Even though they're presenting it as such already, you know? So, yeah, I thought that was horseshit myself. It is what it is again, but what are you going to do, right? Next up, we had Roman Reigns versus Drew McIntyre. This match was fucking great. I don't think anyone can say this was not a good match. This match was fantastic for a variety of reasons. The primary reason, in my opinion, is because you have two megastar-esque guys, right? Now, I don't think that either of them are megastars yet. Like, none of them are mainstream, like, known, you know what I'm saying? Like, if I go outside and I ask 10 people, I say, hey, who's this guy? And I show them a picture of Drew McIntyre. Probably, like, if we're lucky, one or two of them might know. Most of them are going to be like, who the fuck is this guy? You know what I'm saying? Why are you showing me gay porn, you know? So, it's like I envision a picture of Drew McIntyre with his hairy chest, like, on his knees, you know? They're like, why is this guy wet and on his knees? I don't get it, you know? So, and same thing with Roman Reigns. Like, he's not famous yet. Someone might recognize him as like the cousin of Roman Reigns of The Rock on Hobbs and Shaw or whatever. That's about it. I don't think anybody else would know. But nonetheless, they feel like stars, right? They are big, strong guys that are presented as very strong and very powerful and winners. And as a result, the match becomes good, you know? The match favored Drew McIntyre. I thought, even though he lost, I thought he looked better than Roman Reigns. I don't want Roman Reigns to win because I'm liking this Roman Reigns. And I don't like Drew McIntyre anymore because he's been like the most stale champion ever, possibly. But nonetheless, right, Drew McIntyre came off looking really strong. Drew McIntyre came off like kicking out of like multiple spears. The second spear Roman Reigns did is one of the best spears ever, right? It looked like he killed them with it, right? And Drew McIntyre no-sells it. Fine. It is what it is. I understand that there's a lot of no selling going on in WWE today. Nia Jax no sold like 15 moves. Like she gets like thrown like against the steel steps and just gets up like nothing happened. It's the weirdest thing ever. But it is what it is, right? Like Drew McIntyre was going to be presented as the guy that's going to be hard to beat, and Roman Reigns is presented as the guy that's going to find a way. The match gets, of course, ruined when Jey Uso, the perpetual embarrassment, comes in and interferes, right? He just distracts, Drew. Eventually, Roman Reigns hits a low blow, right, which kind of also ruined the match, I rather would have had Roman Reigns lose, like, clean than have him win with a low blow, because at least then it would be, like, a classic match. You'd be like, holy shit, this is one of the best matches ever, like, especially from these two guys. But nonetheless, right, he hits a low blow. Jey Uso comes in, hits a botched super kick. Like, I don't even know why these people do the super kick. It's very odd to me that people like Jey Uso do the super kick. It looks like shit every time he does it. It looks botched. And it looked botched this time, too. It's like all these people doing moves they shouldn't be doing. Jey Uso, like I said about Natalya, stick to your horse shit. You have the Uso splash, which doesn't look that good either, but at least it looks better than the super kick, right? And you have your tag team moves, like the double super kick and shit like that. It's kind of like, all right, it's tolerable if two people do it and they both botch it, and it looks kind of decent anyways, right? Because there's two of them doing it. So it's like, all right, they botched it because like they have to like time it perfectly. There's all these other elements. But now that he's a single star, he gets exposed very easily, And I know a lot of people really like this new Jey Uso, and they really liked the series of matches he had with Roman Reigns, which involved like 10-minute like bouts of crying like in the middle of the match. But I was not a fan of either of those things. I'm only a fan of the fact that Roman Reigns is getting pushed correctly. That he feels like a big deal. At this point, I don't even think he needs Heyman anymore, He is legit. He the head of the table, motherfuckers, the head of the table. I love Roman Reigns. But anyways, Roman Reigns slaps on the guillotine, and that's all she wrote. He wins by like pass out, I think, right? Or maybe, I don't know if Drew McIntyre tapped out. I don't think he did. I think he just passed out, right? So he wins with the guillotine, and then like he and Jey Uso seem to like become friends again, It's really weird. I didn't really enjoy the whole Jey Uso, element, but the match was pretty good. Also, I didn't enjoy how when Drew McIntyre hit the Claymore and Roman Reigns kind of fell and hit the ref, that it was presented as if it was the end of Roman Reigns. Like Drew McIntyre just kicked out of like 3 or 4 finishers, and Roman Reigns can't kick out of one. I get that he's a heel, but let's not get it twisted. This is Drew McIntyre. You know what I mean? This is not John Cena, right? But whatever, The match was good. I can't say that the match wasn't good. The match felt like a big deal. The match had a lot of moments, a lot of moves, some good false finishes because of how strong both Drew and Roman Reigns have been booked over the years, especially Roman Reigns. When Roman Reigns hits a spear, you feel like it's over. It's not like when John Cena hit the AA, where on every pay-per-view, John Cena hits the AA, and the first one is going to be a kick-out. With Roman Reigns, you don't know that always. So it felt like a big deal when Drew kicked out of 2. This is all that wrestling is, fundamentally. You have to build stories up and build characters up. You have to make both people look very strong so that when they wrestle each other, when two strong-looking people, when two well-booked people wrestle each other, you really are left wondering who's going to win. Even though in this one, I thought it was pretty clear that Roman Reigns was probably going to win, you're still thinking to yourself, what if Drew McIntyre wins? He just beat Randy Orton. You know what I mean? Or even if it was Randy Orton versus Roman Reigns, you'd be like, oh shit, Randy Orton is like getting this huge push. Like, what if he wins? So that's what wrestling is all about. Wrestling is not about like having two pseudo well booked people and then like having them have a 7-star classic, right? Like I'm looking forward, for example, to next week's AEW, which is like a pay-per-view basically, but it's going to be Dynamite, right? I'm looking forward to it. Why? Not because I think that Jon Moxley and Kenny Omega are going to like have a great match. You know what I'm saying? I don't think either of them is really that good, to be honest. Like I think Jon Moxley is a 3-move chump who never wrestles on TV, and I think Kenny Omega is a guy who does a taunt after every move and before every move. So they're both kind of goofy to me, right? But at the same time, you cannot deny that Jon Moxley has been booked as undefeatable, and Kenny Omega, I think he's like an 8-0 or like 9-0 this year, and he had a pretty good run with Hangman Adam Page as tag team champion. Like I think Kenny Omega has lost like 1 or 2 matches this entire year, and I think that he's been pinned like 1 or maybe 0 times. You know what I mean? Like he's had a really solid year. So it's like if you had to pick 2 people in this company to wrestle each other, you would pick these two as the two best guys, as the two top guys, motherfuckers. That's kind of what I'm getting at here, you know? Like, that's why John Moxley versus Eddie Kingston didn't feel like a big deal, because at the end of the day, it's Eddie Kingston, a guy who's supposed to wrestle on AEW Dark. You know what I mean? That's why Darby Allin and Orange Cassidy don't feel like big deals. Also because of the fact that they weigh about 150 pounds combined, you know? But they don't feel like big deals. Roman Reigns and Drew McIntyre feel like big deals. Dean Ambrose and Kenny Omega don't feel like big deals, but they're at least booked as if they are big deals. You know, I remember back in the day, WWE had this like fantasy thing, right? It was like WWE Fantasy, right? Where you draft like, you know, your roster, right? Each wrestler has like a value, right? Like 5 million, 4 million, 3 million, whatever, 2.5 million, and you just draft people, you know, like that fit your budget, and you get points for like every finisher they do, every match they win. I think you get more points for submissions. You get like points if they use like what's it called, like foreign objects, things like that, right? And I remember that, like, you know, clearly it was very easy to like pick who was going to do well that week, right? I remember Rob Conway was getting his push, and you knew that Rob Conway, even though he was a jobber, he had like a $1 million value. He had like the lowest value, like out of like anyone that was winning, basically. You knew that he should be in your roster, because you knew that every week he was going to beat like Goldust or something using his finishing move, right? Or hitting him with a chair or something, right? You knew something was going to go down with him. Then you had people that like JBL and Kurt Angle and Undertaker, who were all valued at like 5 million, where you're like, all right, these are the main eventers. They're probably going to win, but you never know, you know what I mean? That kind of shit. So it's like, that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, even though Rob Conway and Lashley at the time were like new guys in WWE, their value was like pretty high compared to their fantasy value, right? Because they were booked strong. It doesn't matter, right? Like no one cares about Rob Conway. No one probably ever has. But you knew during that time period that Rob Conway was going to come and he was going to win. And then eventually, if they kept doing this, if Rob Conway kept winning, then there would come a point where he would be like, well, wait a second, I keep winning, I don't want a title shot, right? This is basically what happened with Sheamus. Sheamus, when he debuted on ECW, he won. He like lost to Goldust once, but then he beat Goldust like 15 times, and he was like 8-0 or like 8-1 or like 12-1 when he went to Raw. And then on Raw, he was like, wait a second, dude, I'm 12-1, you know? And the guy that beat me, I beat his ass several times. So it's like I should automatically be propelled to the main event. And he was right. And with Sheamus, they pulled the trigger and they made him champion, right? And that's what set Sheamus up to have the remainder of his career, which has been pretty good. Sheamus is very underrated. But you see what I'm getting at, motherfuckers, right? People have to be booked well. And the one thing that this match did was it showed how good a match can be when you have two well-booked individuals. The match, if this same caliber of match was had by Lince Dorado versus Drew Gulak, nobody would give a fuck. You know, they could have a much better match maybe, but nobody would give a fuck, right? You care because you know that one of these two well-booked individuals is going to have to take an L. You know what I'm saying? Simple as that, cucks. Simple as that. And then after this horseshit pay-per-view, except for the main event, was done, we had to finally wait for obviously the reason that all of us tuned in, which was the Undertaker's retirement. The retirement starts with the introduction of like 15 people that Undertaker had relevant moments with in his career. These people ranged from like the Godwins to Jeff Hardy, which I don't even think that it's fair to say that Jeff Hardy is like this iconic opponent of the Undertaker. They had like one match on Raw in like 2003, you know what I mean? And it was a good match, right? But it was one of those matches where you're like, all right, you know Jeff Hardy's not going to beat Undertaker for the title, you know what I mean? There's a 0% chance of that happening, you know? Jeff Hardy did well, and he almost made you believe that he could have won, right? But and it is like a great match. But just because that match happened doesn't mean that they're like, you know, these rivals for their entire lives. Nonetheless, it was good. Godfather came out. I know they're very close in real life. Kane, of course, came out. They're close in real life. Triple H, Shawn Michaels, these guys, you know, like people he actually had history with Mankind. Like Shawn Michaels and Undertaker have had like some of the best matches ever, and they've been rivals for like their entire careers almost, right? Same thing with Triple H and Taker. They've wrestled at at WrestleMania 3 times. So, you know, there you have it. Brock Lesnar should have been there in my opinion, but I understand that like that can happen. It's also not in his like little wheelhouse type of shit, but it was what it was. It was good to see a lot of these wrestlers come back. You know, it was good to see. I was watching with my girlfriend. I was telling her about these guys. I was like, oh, this guy this and this guy that. And then Savio Vega comes out. And I'm like, oh, this guy's named Savio Vega. Nobody knows anything about him. He was around for like 3 weeks. Nobody gives a fuck. But it is what it is, right? It was good to see. And then The good thing that happened was, I don't know if they taped it before or after, but then Undertaker came out and everyone was already gone. This was good, because even though Undertaker has recently broken kayfabe, Undertaker is not a guy that's going to go and shake Jeff Hardy's hand on TV, right? That's just not who he is. That would feel weird. So I'm glad that everyone was gone. Also, that gave the opening for a potential attack from The Fiend. Now, I'm not saying I wanted this to happen. Part of me, of course, did. Part of me, of course, wanted The Fiend to attack Undertaker. Not because I give a fuck about The Fiend. I don't give a shit if The Fiend gets fired tomorrow. But because that would mean that Undertaker might wrestle again. Now, I think that he will wrestle again. It's only a matter of time, motherfucks. COVID ends, right? In, like, let's say a year, who the fuck knows, right? And then we start doing the Saudi Arabia shows again. And then Saudi Arabia is going to be like, here's what's going to happen. We're going to pay you a lot of money, and you're going to give us The Undertaker, right? Because nobody wants to fucking see Lince Dorado. That's what they're going to say. And Vince McMahon is going to have one of those moments that he has a couple of times a year when they go to Saudi Arabia, where he actually starts thinking about booking things people want to see. I don't want to hear this horseshit. Nobody wanted to see Goldberg versus Undertaker. I did, motherfucks. I did. I would much rather see that than Ali versus Mansoor, or whatever the fuck they had. Like Mansoor versus Ziggler. Like, I don't give a shit about that. That's like the most forgettable thing ever. You know what I mean? I couldn't give a fuck about any of that shit. I don't care about anything on those cards other than like the main 2 or 3 matches, because they're always like Randy Orton versus Triple H. Triple H and Michaels versus Brothers of Destruction. You know what I mean? Goldberg versus Undertaker, right? You're seeing these like incredible things that you like probably would never see otherwise. We saw Shawn Michaels come out of retirement, and people are like, it wasn't a 5-star match. Who the fuck cares? Shawn Michaels came out of retirement, motherfucks. He hasn't wrestled in like 10 years, and he's out there trying his best, I guess, you know what I'm saying? And this only makes me feel good in the context of like, what else can we see? Because that's Saudi Arabia money. Now, ethics aside, I don't know enough about the whole ethics situation. People are, it's blood money. Saudi Arabia is a country that's trying to obviously change its perception, right? They're trying to change their PR, right? The narrative. Now, I understand that they do some fucked up shit there, and I don't condone any of that. But the facts remain, motherfucks. The facts remain. They want to see good wrestling. Now, does this justify them killing journalists? Of course not. But you have to be able to separate the public, right, from the government. Now, I know the government funds some of this WWE activity, right? But it's not appropriate to be like, well, you guys killed this journalist, therefore Saudi Arabia as a country doesn't deserve to have WWE. We're gonna boycott it. You know what I mean? What about the fans? The fans didn't go murder the journalist. The fans, most of them who are kids, by the way, because when they show the Saudi Arabia shows, it's always like one adult male and 15 kids. These kids didn't murder the journalist. These kids want to see John Cena. You know what I mean? They want to see Kane. They want to see cool things. They want to see wrestling, right? So why should they suffer because the government, may do some unscrupulous shit? A lot of governments do that kind of horseshit, motherfucks. But we have to tolerate this world to a degree. Now, if it's the same guy, right? I think it is actually. It's like the sheik who got the journalist killed and now runs these WWE events. That's kind of fucked up, WWE should take a stand on that and be like, yo, man, we can't associate ourselves with you, right? But it's the same exact thing that people make fun of, if Vince McMahon said, I don't want to associate myself with you because you're a bad man, right? That's one way to look at it, right? But a lot of times, people get mad when that kind of shit happens. When someone's like, yo, I don't want to associate with you, so I'm going to fire you, right? A lot of people get mad, for example, that all these sexual abuse accusations got people like Enzo Amore fired, right? A lot of people were like, whoa, wait a second. Shouldn't Velveteen Dream get a hearing? Shouldn't there be some sort of investigation before people get dropped left and right? So if it's okay for WWE to distance themselves in one way, then they have to be consistent and distance themselves in other ways. They choose to not be consistent, and that's not good. But nonetheless, from a wrestling fan perspective, we get to see cool shit. So now I'm thinking to myself, who the fuck knows? People are like, oh, CM Punk's gonna come back, all this horse shit, right? He might not come back, but he might come back if some Saudi sheik is like, yo, here's $2 million, bring back CM Punk. We want to see CM Punk. We didn't get a chance to see him because, we didn't have this deal while he was around. So bring back CM Punk. And he comes back, and then the rest of us are like, oh shit, that's kind of cool. CM Punk versus who the fuck knows, right? It's kind of neat, you haven't seen it in a long time. So it could be cool. We saw Tyson Fury versus Braun Strowman. Good shit, but I digress. I don't want to keep talking about Saudi Arabia because I don't really give a shit about Saudi Arabia. But the point is, Undertaker is a special attraction, and thus it's good to see him, even if it means he has to wrestle, or even hopefully not, but even if he has to put over the Fiend. It's always going to be good to see Undertaker. And this was bittersweet, Undertaker has been around for a long time. A lot of people like myself have grown up with The Undertaker. I actually started watching wrestling during Undertaker's hiatus. I think the first episode I ever watched of Raw was the episode where, like, Undertaker pulls himself out of a six-pack challenge at Armageddon or some shit, right? And he's like, I'm done with this horse shit, right? And he leaves, like, inexplicably. Apparently he was injured, right? But he just leaves, and they put, like, British Bulldog in there. And I'm thinking to myself, what? I want to see this Undertaker guy, you know? He was supposed to be this cool dude, right? I knew who he was. Like, I'd heard of him, you know? And then in that hiatus, like, while he was gone and Triple H was champion, I would go to Blockbuster periodically, and I would rent, like old WrestleManias, right? And I watched him in other WrestleManias, and I was like, oh, this guy's cool. But I had forgotten that he was still a current wrestler, you know, because, like, when I was a kid, when I would watch wrestling, you know, like, 1 month felt like a fucking eternity, you know? And he was gone for, like, 4 or 5 months. I'm like, oh, this guy might never come back. Like, I didn't know that that's how it was in wrestling, where periodically people leave for 5 months, you know? And strangely enough, after he came back, you know, Undertaker was around for a long, long time until he started being, like, a part-timer, right? So now all these motherfuckers, all these stupid-ass smarks who keep saying things like, WWE shouldn't rely on part-timers. None of these people can ever appreciate something like The Undertaker, right? Because Undertaker is so good that even as a part-timer, he feels like a full-timer. It's The Undertaker, motherfuckers. This was a great moment. This was an iconic moment in wrestling history. Now that I've said the positive, let's talk about the negative, because there's a lot of negatives going on here. First of all right, I've personally prepared myself for Undertaker's retirement long before, right? I had a couple of friends that I wasn't friends with at the time, but when WrestleMania happened, when it was Undertaker versus Roman Reigns, they went, right? I didn't know who they were until like a year later or whatever, but they went, you know, and one of them told me that he was crying. Like, after he saw Undertaker lose and then put, like, his, you know, like, clothes in the ring with the gloves, then he started crying. Some other friends started telling me they started crying when they saw it on TV. You know, now, I think all of them had the same kind of argument. I mean, none of those people have been watching wrestling as long as I have, right? And I'm not here to gatekeep, you know? But I found it weird that these people that have been watching wrestling for like 5-6 years are these huge Undertaker fans, even if they went back to see the shit that he did, right? It's not the same thing as seeing it live, you know, seeing it at the contemporary moment, right? Or sorry, at the contemporaneous moment, right? Where he like comes out and just like forces, you know, JR's face into McMahon's ass, you know? Like, seeing that shit, that heel turn, you're like, no, not you too, Undertaker, you know? Like, these things are awesome moments. And all of a sudden, all these people that have been wrestling fans for like 5-6 years start crying. You know, I'm just like, I find it really weird. Like, obviously, I didn't cry. Like, I've never been that invested in wrestling where I'll cry over something that happens on TV. This, admittedly so, this would be one of the things that I think would be okay to cry at, because it's not a storyline, it's not kayfabe. It's actually a man's career coming to an end, you know? And it's like, it's emotional because there's that element of like, dude, this guy wants to keep going, clearly. You know, that's why he keeps coming back every year, you know, for the last like 10 years, right? But it's time to hang it up, you know? Like it's time. But it was bittersweet, but I also will say this. Undertaker already retired, you know? He announced his retirement, saying specifically that he will come back if he is needed, right? So he announced his retirement, so this already happened. The farewell element doesn't really like get my dick hard, you know what I'm saying? But nonetheless, I have to give props to Undertaker for an awesome career, one of the best, if not the best career, like, of all time, you know? Like, certainly as a career, I think it's hard to argue that Undertaker hasn't had the best career in WWE history, you know? He's a company man. He stood there through thick and thin. I'm sure he had opportunities to go elsewhere, and he never did. You know what I'm saying? He never did. He stuck it through, and he carried wrestling for a long, long time, motherfuckers. For a long, long time, Undertaker carried wrestling. Honestly, after the Ruthless Aggression era, everything went down the drain. Let's be real, motherfuckers. Everything went down the drain. And then when people like Batista and John Cena left, Undertaker was still there holding it down, motherfuckers. When Stone Cold left and, you know, The Rock left, he was there holding it down. When Brock left, he was there holding it down. When Angle left, he was there holding it down. WWE has lost a lot of people that they've invested in, but they have not lost The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Orton, and for that reason, all the people that I just mentioned, all of them, I think, like, deserve, when it's all said and done, to be like in the top 10 greatest wrestlers of all time. They did it because wrestling is something that they enjoy. You know what I mean? They didn't do it because, oh, like Jeff Hardy, for example, bouncing from TNA to WWE to TNA to WWE to some indie show, all this kind of horseshit, you know? They stuck through it, right? There are people that could have left and didn't, you know? I don't want to hear this horseshit about, like, all these other wrestlers that have left, and how they're the same, and they're not the same, right? Kurt Angle is a legend. Kurt Angle is probably, like, in terms of like in-ring guys, I don't think I'd rather watch anyone else other than Kurt Angle. But let's be real, Kurt Angle's prime was in TNA, and a lot of his really good matches were also in TNA. You know, he had a few great matches in WWE, but because they were in TNA, something is lost there, right? Something is lost there, you know? There you have it, motherfucks. That's what I have to say about that. Also, in the context of Undertaker retiring, right? It's kind of weird for Undertaker to retire and have a ceremony. That's not really an Undertaker-esque thing. And it just feels like this has happened before. You know, like, you can't put your boots and shit at WrestleMania and have all these weird friends of mine start crying left and right, and then do the same thing a few years later, you know? Because that sets a dangerous precedent. If Undertaker comes back, then this was kind of meaningless. Let's be real. If he comes back again, this was kind of meaningless, right? Just like when people were saying that when Shawn Michaels came back, it kind of ruined everything, because it's like, dude, you said that you weren't going to be one of these guys, and then eventually you became one of those guys, you know what I mean? But nonetheless, I'm not here to shit on Undertaker. I would never do that. Undertaker is awesome. He's great in every capacity. You know, he's a great wrestler. He's actually, in my opinion, one of the most underrated promo guys of all time. I understand that while he was the dead man, like, he didn't really cut promos because that wasn't really part of the character. But when he did, you know, when he cut promos against The Rock and shit like that back in the day in the late 90s, I thought that he always got the best of The Rock. And then when he was the American Badass, you know, his promos were solid to amazing, you know. And his his work in-ring segments that aren't wrestling was also incredible. You know, that period of time when he would do that little chair move, where you put the chair on the throat and slam the person's face and the chair to the ground. When he made JR kiss McMahon's ass, you know, when he tried to, like, marry Stephanie, like, all these things are so many iconic moments, right? That he had that he didn't need to have, because he wasn't there for that. And then he stayed at the top of the game for so long. There was a point in time when WrestleMania was essentially, let's watch because Undertaker's there. Nobody really gave a fuck about, like, John Cena versus Orton. Nobody gives a shit about that. I can read about what happened the next day. You know, this is when pay-per-views were shit you had to pay for. You know, nobody gave a fuck about that. Like, they started bringing back The Rock and things like that in order to make the show special again. But the reality was what the reality was. There was an over-reliance on Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. Every WrestleMania had the Undertaker match and had the Shawn Michaels match. These were matches that people look forward to. Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle, Taker versus everyone that he wrestled. Shit, even Taker versus Mark Henry, when Mark Henry was still a jobber, right? Or Taker 2-on-1 against Big Show and Albert, you know, or A-Train, whatever the fuck he was at that point. These things were always exciting. You still wanted to see Taker versus Albert, you know, who gives a fuck? But you wanted to see it. It was still awesome, because Taker is awesome. You know, it's going to suck knowing that he's not going to be around unless, like, in my opinion, the Saudis cough up that money. But nonetheless, I thought it was great, you know, to see him one last time. The pay-per-view was shit, but Taker was awesome. So there you have it, motherfucks. See you guys later.